Today I would like to thank Peter very much because he sent me an email and among other things asked me what is nitrosative stress and how can you actually find out what is behind it or what leads to nitrosative stress and what can you do. And that's a very interesting topic, especially since we keep discussing about the importance of mitochondria. The mitochondria are our cells' power plants. So every cell is a small separate organism. And these mitochondria are able to use their so-called respiratory chains depending on what the body makes available to them. What they need for energy production to produce 38 millimoles ATP, so adenosine triphosphate. So the bottom line is a cell that is adequately supplied with healthy and strong mitochondria, a cell that also has a healthy mitochondrial metabolism, and an organ made up of cells that have enough mitochondria, is quite strong, robust and capable of the tasks of the body. Now, there are very many things in our life that also have a negative effect on these mitochondria. And a large group of drugs has a huge impact on them. And these are the antibiotics. Anti means against and bios means life. And especially antibiotics that not only work outside the cell, but intracellularly, have a big effect on the influence of the mitochondria. This means that mitochondria can be partially irreversibly destroyed with it, so that a cell cannot rebuild its mitochondria. Mitochondria are like tiny creatures. They have their own metabolism and their own genetic information. We have about 1,000 to 1,500 mitochondria per cell. If you are someone who enjoys exercising and also know your vitality can only build up in movement and strength, you will also build up a fairly large reservoir of strong mitochondria. You can then fall back on this energy output again and again. Many diseases are so-called mitochondriopathies. And with that I have a weakness of my liver. With that I also have a weakness of my pancreas. Because when the energy output of these cells is not in order, the functional performance of the organ is reduced. You can say mitochondrial disease of the kidneys when you talk about kidney failure, about poor kidney performance, or if the muscles of the bladder are simply too weak and you have to go to the toilet constantly and have an irritable bladder, or the urine is dripping. That means that the muscles of the bladder muscle are too weak in terms of energy supply. This means that the contraction and relaxation cannot function adequately. Now, Peter asked me, why don't you explain the nitrosative stress? What is it? Now, you have to know that in us and in almost all cells, we produce nitric oxide. This nitric oxide, NO, is important to us. It is important and it is made from the amino acid, for example, L-arginine. L-arginine is, for example, in peanuts, in pumpkin seeds, in beef, in shrimp, or in chicken. This nitric oxide has tasks, and one of the most important biological activities of NO is that it regulates the defense against bacteria. So the cytotoxicity, the attack of bacteria on the cells, is prevented by nitric oxide. The other task is that nitric oxide has a vasodilatory effect on our blood vessels. So an adequate presence of nitric oxide means that the vessels are easy to regulate in their tension, but also in their relaxation. Relaxed vessels have no blood pressure in the sense that tense vessels cause high blood pressure. Also, the whole mitochondrial energy metabolism, we have 5 so-called respiratory chains that take place under incredible thousands of biochemical reactions in a coordinated manner, are also regulated by NO. And something else. The secretion of glutamate, which is very important for the synapses, so a presynaptic cleft, when a nerve transmits a signal to the next, is also regulated via the NO. But now, there are a lot of so-called stresses in our lives, which result in the increase of nitric oxide production, far beyond what the body actually needs. But what are these stressors? I've already mentioned one thing, antibiotics. These are also toxins like heavy metals, light metals, aluminium, arsenic, palladium, lead, copper, mercury. So things that we may not even notice at the moment because we don't even recognise them. Because aluminium is included in every 5th brand of lipstick. Because all dark hair colour contains lead, and what you put on your scalp, unfortunately, also ends up in your body. That is smoking, a very big issue for nitrosative stress. Lack of exercise can lead to an increase in the counter-regulatory level of NO. Cervical spine trauma, so these rear-end collisions, this whiplash. Dr. Bodo Kuklinski, this is for all my colleagues, wrote a very nice book years ago about the cervical spine trauma. And you will realise and understand that an instability of the cervical spine, and I mention that now for the incredible number of people who are not taken seriously, because at the moment you may not be able to see anything on a spine, on a CT scan, on an MRI, those whose cervical spine is in an instability are consequently in a chronic nitrosative permanent stress, which takes place on a physical level as a result. You will find at least 6 to 8 pages of diseases and symptoms in this book which can be traced back to nitrosative stress as a result of cervical spine trauma. I have to tell you, we doctors have to take care of it, because these are people who suffer incredibly for years and decades. These are stresses that are also associated with excessive oxygen consumption and microcirculation disorders that then take place from over-acidification, from poor blood circulation. Please only think of the big word stress. Stress as a result of what stress itself does to the body, because of course it cannot produce stress hormones indefinitely. And especially this time now is of course unbelievable. How many fears and how much panic and how much stress we have to compensate for at the moment, and one is more prone to it and the other less so, of course. And then there is your own life. These are all things that our body has to compensate for, of course. And this compensation causes that with an increase of this nitric oxide, inflammatory cascades open up. The so-called pro-inflammatory cytokines within the immune system now stimulate a cellular immune response. There are a lot of enzymes, so biocatalysts, which are inhibited by this high amount of nitric oxide. And thus, of course, the energy metabolism is also reduced. And of course, the reduction also means that exhaustion arises. This can happen in general terms. On the other hand, there is an increase in glutamate. And with glutamate, the glutamate receptor is now massively stimulated in the brain. This opens up receptor channels and calcium can infiltrate. If calcium infiltrates too much, it can lead to a loss of function of the nerve cells. And if there is a loss of function of the nerve cells, then we classify a number of clinical pictures there as well, which have to do with the nerve metabolism, like Parkinson's, like tremor. Tremors are not always Parkinson's. This can be a problem on completely different levels. And this nitrosative stress leads to an increase in cholesterol, for example. This increases the susceptibility to allergies, no longer adequately responding to an allergen. Egg protein can be an allergen, for example, but it can also be grain or pollen. Why does my immune system overregulate? This is allergy. I already said neurological diseases, food intolerance. I can't tolerate things anymore. I react with flammability after 4 to 70 hours. And thus change my gut health significantly. Remember, 80% of our immunity is the mucous membrane. And losing mucosal immunity, on the other hand, of course, means an increase of susceptibility to disease. Then there is fatigue and stress and headaches, and what has already been mentioned. You can measure the nitrosative stress, and with that, measure the products that result from this. Too high nitric oxide production. This is the so-called peroxynitrite. That is the nitrotyrosine, and that is the methylmalonic acid. Methylmalonic acid is a wonderful parameter that can be measured in urine and is a marker for the presence of sufficient vitamin B12, which is now absolutely down to its knees due to the high content of nitric oxide. We hardly ever measure vitamin B12 in the blood. And if so, then there is a huge reference range. And when I judge laboratory values, when I've measured vitamin B12 in the blood, then it always has to be at the top or even a little bit higher. So the general rule in the middle and just a bit down would still be sufficient. Does not apply to the vitamin B12 supply. And vitamin B12 is the most important B vitamin for mitochondrial metabolism. Of course, in addition to the vitamins B6, B2 and the others. So this methylmalonic acid and also citrulline as a marker of nitrosative stress can be measured in the urine. This is a morning urine measurement. The nitrotyrosine, as a byproduct and long-term marker of nitrosative stress, can also be measured very well in the serum. It is important to understand that we have important amino acids such as L-tryptophan, such as tyrosine. And L-tryptophan, for example, is a protein, is an amino acid building block for building 5-HTP. 5-HTP becomes serotonin, our happiness hormone, and the serotonin becomes melatonin. We need that to sleep well. Melatonin is one of the most important antioxidants and has a high protective effect with hormone-active tumours. So ovarian, breast cancer, peritoneal, abdominal wall, and also prostate in men. If these amino acids are made ineffective, I cannot make sufficient serotonin and also not the melatonin. With tyrosine, it's a bit more dangerous because it turns into dopamine. This turns into adrenaline, noradrenaline, melanin. And if the metabolism does not continue now, then, of course, with a dopamine deficiency, I can develop a Parkinson-like picture. That is why this is a great basic examination that can also be done beautifully on children, because, of course, it doesn't hurt like a blood sample would. This is nitrosative stress, and it should be a basic examination for all people who also have a stress which is not to be understood in the acute state, but which has become chronic at the latest. We also do this examination as a preventative measure, just to know if the body can keep its balance. If we noticed increased methylmalonic acid, we know that the cell has to get by with too little vitamin B12. Then we give B12 in the form of hydroxycobalamin. And for this hydroxycobalamin, the level for academic medicine is a depot of 1,000 micrograms per month. Sometimes I give almost 5,000 a day. And for a few days I keep really high doses, because I want to give a body with 700 trillion cells the chance to build up the storage again. It's really hard to overdose on vitamin B12. Then, of course, you go back down with the dosage and can stabilise it, and in the long run, very well, through an appropriate depot injection on a monthly basis. In addition to B12, you always need B9, which is folic acid. There are a number of people who have a defect in the conversion of the inactive into the active folic acid. That's why we love to use the MTHFR. That is the active folic acid, and we always combine it in the administration of vitamin B12. It is important to know what the mitochondria need and what lowers a high nitrosative stress in the countercompensation. And these are all B vitamins, plus C, E, A and vitamin D. Vitamin D, please, always in the oily form and in connection with K2. All the substitutions you make, they must be preceded by receiving an overview about the minerals in my body. Have your intra- and extracellular minerals determined. When I say extracellular, those are the ones that are found in the tissue outside the cell, such as calcium, sodium and chloride. When I speak of intracellular, I mean the ones that also work their 70%. then it is of no use to me that I measure them outside of the cell. I need to know how much is left in the cell. We are talking about a very, very sensitive energy metabolism. And that's magnesium and potassium, of course. And I would also recommend to have an intracellular measurement of zinc done. You will see that you may be zinc deficient. And you don't know. But zinc is a super talent. Without zinc, the immune system can never build up its activity. 400 to 500 enzymes are not served without zinc. And enzymes are biocatalysts like fuel. To even get a reaction going. So, an incredible number of things. In addition, of course, secondary plant substances, everything that is colourful in vegetables is so valuable for our energy metabolism, whether it's peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, grapes, cysteine, curcumin, alpha-lipoic acid, but also melatonin, which we spoke of. Glutathione as the most important basis for our detoxification. I hardly ever give people glutathione, but always L-cysteine. You know the ACC 300, for example, if you have a cough. That is the precursor to glutathione. However, there is no detoxification without glutathione, and it's important for this intracellular metabolism. And it is a valuable investigation that you should also have done preventatively, but at the latest, when something knocks on their door, get an idea of your so-called nitrosative stress. Via these parameters you indirectly get answers to questions you ask yourself about why your body got unbalanced. Because your body doesn't make mistakes. And if it corrects something elsewhere, it has to take something away from somewhere else. It only has the things available that you also take care of in life. And in the stress, you channel the distribution into a stressful situation, which it registers and makes everything available to this stress. And that's actually the big worry I have at this time. Take care of yourself. Try to keep calm. And this calm is not just said nonchalantly. I wish that it would move back into your life, because that has nothing to do with nitrosative stress, because it cannot develop when you live an awareness in life. And of course, try to understand your body in a loving way, why it might have to take one or the other development. But it's nice that you often see how the body gratefully accepts this help and quietly settles back into its old pattern, and blood pressure is no longer needed, or the heart opens, or the arrhythmia calms down. With this in mind, I wish you a very nice Sunday evening. Maybe these episodes of Visite are also something to talk about. Maybe to discuss things with each other. Maybe to change things in life, and not just because the doctor says you should, but rather because you just want it, because you understand it now, and because that is also important to you. Because there really are thousands of diseases, but there's only one health. And 99% of our happiness is based on it. With this in mind, I wish you all a wonderful Sunday evening and look forward to the next one. Goodbye. Dear viewers, the preceding episode is an indicator for a holistic medical approach and does not replace visiting your family doctor. Thank you.